Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture we'll learn about data types of arrays. In the last lecture we saw how to create arrays using the array method. We can simply pass a list containing elements, let's say 2, 3, 4 and 5. We can also pass an argument called dtype for data type, and that will specify the data type for our array. So let's say the data type for this, let's set it to be equal to integer. So we can simply say np.integer 32. So NumPy has this method integer, and let's save this in a variable called array int for integer. And we can also, let's create another array and then we'll specify the data type to be a float. So let's save this in a variable called float. We can simply say np.array and then pass a list of elements, let's say 2, 3, 4 and 5, and we can specify the data type to be equal to NumPy's, we'll use NumPy's float method, so float 64. Now if we call our array integer object, we have an array and its data type is integer. If we call our second array object that we created, array float, we see that it's a float, right? 2.3.0 and so on. And we can also use the dtype method to find out the data type of our array. For instance, we can find out the data type of our array float object by simply calling the dtype method on our array object, and we see that it's a float. We can also convert an array from one data type to another. For this we'll be using a method called asType. Let's look at an example of how we can do this. Let's create another array object and we'll save this in a variable called array1. We'll use NumPy's array method to create this array, np.array, and let's pass a list of numbers 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10. Okay, so if we call our array1 object, we have our array, and to find out the data type of our array, we can simply call the dtype method on our array object, and we see that it's an integer. Now let's convert this integer data type to a float. So let's do that. We have our array1 object, and then we can convert it by using the asType method. Then we simply pass np dot, we want to convert it to a float, so we'll pass np dot float 64. Okay, and then let's save this in a variable called array, let's say array1 float. Now if we call our array1 float object, we see that it's converted to a float by looking at the elements in our array. To verify that, we can also call the data type method on our array1 float object, and we see that it's a float. This conversion of an array from one data type to another is also called casting. We are casting an array to a different data type. Now let's see how we can convert an integer data type to a float, or a float to, we just saw that. So let's look at how we can convert a float data type to an integer. In this case, anything beyond the decimal point will be cut off or truncated. Let's look at an example. Let's create an array float, and we'll save it in a variable called array float. And let's use numpy's array method to create this float, and we'll pass a list of floating numbers or floats. Let's say 2.33, 3.4, 5.8, 5.9, and maybe 4.23. So if we call our array float object, we have that. And to verify the data type, we can call the dtype method on our array float object. We see that it's a float. Now we'll use the asType method to convert this float array into an integer. So we have our array float object, and then we'll call the asType method on it, and then convert it into an integer or cast it to an integer. So np.integer32. So in this case, we'll get an array containing a list of elements 2, 3, 5, and 4. So anything beyond the decimal point will be truncated. And let's save this in a variable called array integer. Now if we call our array integer object, we get an array containing the elements 2, 3, 5, and 4, and we see that the data type is integer. So this is how we can convert an array of one data type to another. Thank you everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture.